Hello, everyone, and welcome to DC Recommends. I am your host, Drew Kreisman, and on this show, I recommend things. And on this particular show, I am recommending the video game Inscryption, spelled with a Y in there. It's Inscryption, Inscryption. It's available, as far as I can tell, on everything. Steam, I think, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo. I'm playing it on my PlayStation, and I got it for free as a part of the subscription thingamajiggy that they've got. But if you don't, I believe it is $20 to purchase. This is going to be a relatively short review for two primary reasons. One, I have not completed the game yet, and two, I don't want to ruin too much about it, because a lot of the success, in my opinion, and again, I recommend things that I tend to really enjoy. The show is not about me coming on here to criticize things. So why do I recommend this to people? Well, one of the primary reasons is that, and the old phrase, no zealot like a convert, right? There are a lot of things about the basic philosophy of this game that typically I either aren't for me, or sometimes I even really actively dislike. And so let's talk about a couple of those things and why they're working for me here. And then a couple other little details as I recommend this to, I think, the people who tend to enjoy the types of games that I do, especially strategy RPG enjoyers and enjoyers of card games. So this is tickling a very similar funny bone, whatever you want to call it, right? Tendency, as did Marvel's Midnight Suns, which most of you know I fell in love with last year, though it's got a completely different vibe from Marvel. And I'll start with that because I am not the biggest fan, just in general, of horror, thriller, scary, creepy doos, right? The stuff that's meant to give you the heebie-jeebies. And this is very much meant to give you the heebie-jeebies, and I will say it's very successful at it. The vibe is intense and interesting and well thought out and complete and well executed. I will say, again, for somebody who doesn't love this type of thing, I prefer eerie to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, buckets of blood, or things jumping out at the corner, the jump scare, literally, right? So you don't have any of that in this game. It's not a game full of jump scares. It's not a game where your heart rate is going to suddenly jack way up because something intense or awful or horrifying or disturbing just happened. Well, there was one moment I had where I was very uncomfortable, but I would use words like that: unsettling, disturbing at times, more of that, creepy, heebie-jeebies, but it's not outright horror, and it's certainly not thrasher, right? But there is a certain amount of, one of the basic premises of the card game builds in the idea of sacrifice. And anyone who's played Magic the Gathering is familiar with the concept of having sort of an army of monsters at your disposal, which is very similar in this game. But built in as a part of the premise is that you have to sacrifice your monsters and use their blood and their bones to do things. So that's the type of game that we're talking about right here. So because I think the vibes are so well done, it's subdued enough, it never goes into that, just trying to freak you out place, and really has just been mysterious, even as much so I want to learn more and more about what's going on in this unusual world, right? So for whatever reason, its particular version of that has gotten past my natural predilection away from horror. Secondarily, I tend not to enjoy games that force you to play them over and over again, where failure is built into it. I've talked about this a lot in other spaces and on Twitter and in the Discord and things about not particularly enjoying FromSoft games, right? Elden Ring, Bloodborne, stuff like that, Dark Souls, largely because I don't get a ton of enjoyment out of fighting a boss over and over again, learning its mechanics, figuring out the best quick twitch reactions, basically learning the fight, doing it the way they want me to do it, or figuring out some sort of circumvention, and then beating the fight and moving on. For me, that's not particularly fun, though I do understand why a lot of people find it incredibly satisfying, right? There are, I would say, in old school RPGs, when I go back and play, say, Final Fantasy VI, if you're grinding through a dungeon and you've beaten several difficult monsters in a row, but you haven't gotten to a save point, and then you die one step short of the save point, and now you've got to do the entire dungeon over again. I hate that. That's my least favorite part, probably, of those old school Final Fantasy games, or old school RPGs in general. Like, some people think that autosave, or the ability to save everywhere, like, ruins the difficulty or whatever of the game, and I just completely disagree. For me, like, that old school way of doing it was just frustrating, more than anything. So I find a lot of that frustrating. Inscryption is very much a game that expects you to lose, die, fail. It's built into the premise. For me, though, this game probably does it in a more clever, or certainly more satisfying way than any other game that I've played, where it expects you to fail, start over at the beginning, and then do it again. Now, I will say, I haven't played Hades yet. I understand that it has a really satisfying system for this as well, and I'm really interested in trying that game out. But as a person who loves card games, who loves RPGs, who loves strategy, and the idea that, so again, to counterbalance it with, say, the Elden Ring stuff, in this, I can succeed a second time through because I've thought differently, and I've just made a different strategy, or I've chosen a different path, or sometimes a little bit because of the luck of the draw of the cards, which is also a little bit of an element of any card game, right? The luck of the draw. But losing or dying or failing, or whatever you want to call it, and you'll have to play the game to see what I mean, because it's not as so cut and dry as all that. I guess what I'll say is this, and this might be a slight spoiler for it. So if you're interested and intrigued already, and you want to play the game and go in blind, because so much of this game does work upon you experiencing it for yourself. So skip ahead 20 seconds if you don't want to hear one thing. But there's no game over, really. It's not just load up your last save and start over. Everything that you do is progressing towards something. And it's actually very, very satisfying to get to that place. And so the way that it handles losing or dying, or whatever you might want to call it, again, for me, is just really fantastic. And I can't go too far beyond that, other than to say that it's a really easy to pick up, simple card game to understand, but with a level of depth. If I had one major criticism of it so far, it would be, it seems like I may have reached the end of the depth of the system, where I feel like it could have gone even further into it, and it could have presented me with a lot more. But if this game is going to do that in its final act, I honestly have no idea how far I am through it. That's part of the cleverness of the way it's telling its story, or providing its whatever. But there's a card game, there's also little puzzles to solve, there's some environmental stuff to do, but the vast majority of it is this very simple, super easy to learn, and quite frankly highly addictive once you get into it, card game that has strong RPG elements. And so if you like that kind of thing, and you don't mind or even particularly enjoy the creepy vibe, I cannot more highly recommend this. This is one of those things where, again, like I said, I got it for free with the subscription model. I started playing it thinking, I'll check this out. I'll probably play it for maybe an hour or so, and then I'll go back to MLB The Show or some Final Fantasy, or do whatever I'm doing there. And it ended up eating up about 5 hours of my time and keeping me up till 3 o'clock in the morning. It very quickly became one of those kind of like Civilization, where you go, well, just one more turn, just one more go around. I just want to do one more thing, because if I get these cards to do this, now I think I figured out another part of the puzzle. And in many ways, it feels like you're just sort of constantly solving this huge, elaborate puzzle through a series of much smaller, much more simple, really satisfying puzzles. And so even as a guy who's not a big puzzle gamer, that has been interesting. So yeah, I have to highly recommend Inscryption, because it's a game built around several premises that I typically do not enjoy, and it hooked me anyway. And I'm going to see if I can beat it sometime either today or tomorrow, and if I've got any additional thoughts, I will bring them to you. Other than that, DC recommends you try out Inscryption if you enjoy creepy vibes, card games, RPG mechanics, and unusual and clever games that are interested in doing their own thing and not necessarily following the formulas that we're used to in a lot of other video games. Highly recommend Inscryption. Thank you so much for listening into this episode of DC Recommends. I hope you all will continue to be absolutely awesome out there. You know that I will continue to be absolutely Drew Creasman in here. And until next time, I'll see you out there in the world.